Good afternoon, fellow audience, and thanks InvestPenang for having me here. Without further ado, as the topic that has been raised is we're going to share the top 10 supply chain risks stemming from the coronavirus. So this top 10 supply chain risks has been compiled by the DHL group, and that has been collated from multiple sources through interviews, through market observation, and so forth. Yeah. So on the onset, I think we all agree that this pandemic is unprecedented, especially on the 21st century. For now, I think it started in end of 2019. It is nearing nearly 2 years, and we have not seen the end of this pandemic. As of to date, based on the statistics from the World Health Organization, it has taken 3 million lives in terms of death due to pandemic, and 152 million people around the world are impacted. The uncertainty remains. As you know, basically this pandemic have changed a lot of things. Our lifestyle, the way how we communicate, the way how we operate, the way how we work. And in fact, supply chain is not exempted from this so-called new normal. So what we believe is that this uncertainty will remain, although despite we know that the vaccine is in the market right now. But if you look into the current situation, the numbers are beginning to rise up again. In fact, our neighboring Singapore, we thought that is all under control, is also have to address the concerning numbers that is going up. Same goes to Malaysia and other parts of the world. So it is good for us to know, and prepare our business organization, and we have to bear in mind what constitute these challenges. The effect of the pandemic, yes, the factories and logistic providers seeking to resume operation faces labor shortages and regulatory uncertainty. The presenter before me, our colleague, is also mentioning about how Singapore is also affected by those labor shortages. I think in Malaysia also we do have that situation. That is the point that is noted. But can we overcome the obstacles? I believe that the production-related challenges, that one may be overcome, but the main single largest obstacles as far as logistics is concerned is in terms of the inbound and the outbound freight capacity of the transportation portion of it. Yeah. So at the end of the day, probably we would be able to understand these top 10 challenges, and in any BCPs or mitigation plan that we would like to undertake for our business organization, we can also be concerned about those 10 things. Yeah. So let us move to share with you point number 1, which is regarding the regulatory uncertainties that slows the restart of factory operations. In global perspective, it happens in multiple countries. Probably it's also impacted Malaysia prior to this, but countries like India and China, definitely they are also impacted because of the different rules. Now, these rules are basically done or implemented by the relevant authorities, by the governments, and probably authorities such as the Ministry of Health, yeah, or the National Security. So at times, these rules are conflicting. We are not only looking into country rules, but within a country, for example, India, different municipals or provincials have different rules. So it is a challenge for the supply chain when you are expecting a seamless supply chain to produce efficiency, but at the same time, we have to basically face this kind of challenges in terms of restriction due to the different types of rules at a different location. Not only that, we also noted that the regulatory uncertainties regarding in terms of production schedules. It depends on those individual municipals or province where, for example, in China, certain province, they would allow you to run the production on a split shift. Those who are much more stringent probably requires a 50% reduction of headcount to run at any single time. Of course, when you reduce 50% of the headcount, that will definitely triggers a backlog of orders situation in a production plant or probably in a warehousing environment. Yeah. So again, this is point number one that we have to anticipate and to consider for our contingency. And number two is with regards to lockdown. The lockdown that caused labor and supply shortages in factories or probably in other business operation like the warehousing or the ports. Closer to home, I think we have gone through the types of movement control like the MCO, CMCO, and RMCO. And Hari Raya is also around the corner where people are anticipating a much more stricter controls prior to Hari Raya regarding movement restriction. So it has not ended yet, despite the fact that the vaccine has been rolled out at this point of time. How it basically impacting the supply chain is, of course, the movement, both the employees as well as transport movement for the cargos. I still remember that there is one customer who launched their e-commerce B2C product during the time of a lockdown. And obviously, it is a challenging situation where you have no control in terms of the flight transportation. My particular experience is managing the expectation of the customers that requires time-sensitive delivery of the B2C to the East Malaysia part of, in Sabah and Sarawak, where priority were given for the essential items and PPEs, right? So this is something that we have to consider because it's not going to end at this point of time. This lockdown also causes the backlog to be built at many ports. We are not only talking about the ports in Malaysia, the ports in the west coast of the US and also in Europe are also impacted. In fact, as we are speaking right now, the backlogs currently is facing in Malaysia ports is still occurring. Yeah, of course, for different reason in terms of shortage of container, which we will share further on later. Number three is the public health requirement impacting industrial operations. I guess in many parts of the world, public health requirement is an essential thing which business organization, people who representing companies like mine and yours would have to address. Because of this, we can see that the HSE committee plays a very important role in the setup of the organization because the impose of strict requirement to reopen operation has an impact in terms of our financial capabilities because as a responsible employers and to adhere to the government regulation from Ministry of Health, it is more or less mandatory to provide protective gears, things like masks, gloves, or temperature disinfectant. So these are basically elements that require that has an impact in terms of cost. Those who have not having a fund to basically address this cost element would be in a very difficult situation. Larger companies who have a much more bigger fund would still need to address this and would still need to consider this into their budgeting, right? And not only that, this specific requirement that would need social distance, I believe could be a challenge, especially in a situation of production line where your capacity or your space to operate is in a very limited space condition. And also in terms of approval process that have an impact because it's not easy to comply at this point of time. We are talking about approval process. Probably Malaysia is in a much more better position, but approval process in other parts of the country, they are facing a much more challenging requirement that slows down the the industrial operations to start with. Yeah. Okay, another thing that we have seen, the supply chain risk stemming from this coronavirus, is we have seen a trend that suppliers are invoking force majeure clauses. It is definitely on the rise by far compared to normal years, right? So what is force majeure? A force majeure is actually a clause which is unexpected external circumstances that prevent a party to contract from meeting their obligation, typically natural disasters. In many ways, they have perceived as this COVID-19 as part of natural disasters because in many clauses that has been blanketed by the word pandemic. Yeah. So why they do this is because the suppliers frequently provide it. These clauses provide relief in the event of unforeseen acts of government, of which the government mandated shutdowns may qualify. And also when they are confronted with legal defenses like force majeure clauses being invoked for non-performance, shielding such suppliers from legal and financial liabilities. So as you negotiate your contracts and your terms, like what I've seen, they have added in additional clauses, the COVID-19 clauses to protect the business organization in terms of liabilities and exposure of these unprecedented times or unexpected times. Yeah. Okay, point number 5 is with regards to provincial borders checks, exacerbate trucking shortages. Maybe in Malaysia, or I can say West Malaysia, we are not much impacted by this. But if your supply chain is depending on the global supply chain, these things do happen in South America, in the African continent. And if I can put closer to home, in Sabah, Sarawak, if you have your supply chain over there in that part of the world, there is a border for us to be concerned, which is the Brunei border, because Brunei sits between Sabah and Sarawak, and there is no land access between Sarawak to Sabah or vice versa. You have to go through our neighboring country of Brunei. So you would have, border checks and restriction in terms of requirement to pass through like a transshipment to Brunei. That is just for an example, because trouble on getting that permission or truck availability is also has been reduced. The impact of that is definitely you would see a potential delays of your cargo and a sharp increase in the trucking prices on certain specific location. Yeah. to link to that, you also have close borders, delays, movement from and to. Cross borders remain severely disrupted. Not all borders are open as what we have seen. Some are still closed. So that is why the global supply chain definitely is still being impacted. And also the dependency, later we will speak about the air freight capacity, but even the transportation model is also not sufficient at this point of time. Yeah, this is something, the new normal that we have to be sensitive towards. Okay, on point number 7 is regarding labor shortages that causes congestion at airports and seaport. Right now, this congestion remains relevant even in our Malaysia ports, in Port Klang, I'm not sure in Penang, but I believe there is congestion as also in the major ports of the world. This congestion is not only on labor shortages, there are also concerning shortages of containers. Yeah, and if we hear in the news lately, another thing about the ocean freight, you have seen, this is the highest by far in terms of years before this. This year would be the highest so far, where the containers on the vessel went down to the sea. This is because of the volume and the demand that they have to carry via the sea freight, and due to the time pressure to deliver to the markets and lack of frequencies of vessel schedule. So they took a risk, you know, instead of going and weathering out from the bad weather, they go straight to the bad weather just to ensure that they meet the expectation of the timeline. So what happened is that, based on the report, you will see quite a number of containers which is on the high side that went down to the sea. Yeah, the latest one was a ship from China to the UK or to the US that is also affected by this. Apart from that, that congestion, we also understood that, you know, they have to wait. The vessel cannot dock at the port, and they have to wait for 5 days before they have the capacity to do the unloading. Certainly, this will cause things that will be impacting the cost in terms of supply and demand. Yeah. So when you have challenges at the port, then the vessel's owner will start to think whether should we, is it, make sense for us to still continue with the routing. That goes to the point number 8, which regards to blank sailing, reduced ocean freight capacity. This is a term to learn, whoever not familiar with the word blank sailings. So after this, when we talk to our vendors or colleagues, we can also put up the mention of the word blank sailings. Blank sailing is actually referring to the situation when a carrier cancels a scheduled stop at a specific port or an entire route for a certain vessel. So this usually happens due to low demand. Probably there's not much of a low demand from the consumer, but the restrictions and the challenges that this carrier will face at the destination port stops them or allowing them to cancel the planned routing. So the connectivity globally or regionally has been reduced. If before this there is 5 times a week shipment to a destination port, probably now is only once or twice a week. So it gives a pressure to the load capacity of whatever existing routing there is in the market. Yeah. According to Sea Intelligence Maritime Consulting, about 82 trans-Pacific sailings have been cancelled into March. So this is a very high number compared to the normal years, yeah. And carriers have blank sailing about 54 in total for trade between Asia and Europe. So what makes it worse is that the capacity has been reduced, but the demand of orders, right, especially the rise of e-commerce, are pushing this, demand to be opened back. So there is a mismatch here in terms of the supply and the demand. Yeah. Number 9 is limited air and rail cargo capacity to increase prices. You can see here that in terms of the logistic industry, we are only not depending on the cargo aircraft. We are also heavily dependent on the commercial airline that to move the cargoes from point A to point B. So what you can see here is that commercial airlines are not flying as frequent as they used to do. So there is a gap in terms of capacity for cargo to be moved around the world. Some third-party logistic providers have taken an initiative of procuring dedicated aircraft or probably convert a commercial airline into a cargo aircraft just to ensure that they would be able to cope with the increase of capacity. Yeah, as you know, in terms of the sectors in e-commerce, it has grown an average of 40% in terms of increased volume. So there is intention to increase the capacity in terms of cargo aircraft, but the fact remains the same. The capacity shortages still relevant. So that is why you will see your cost for your air travel cost is on a high side. Your air freight cost is on a high side. Okay. And the expected capacity crunch could lead to an increase of air freight by 300 to 400%, according to the Lodestar. But I believe personally, all is not lost. We currently face the high price for the sea freight, the high price for the air, but at certain location, geographic location, there are solutions towards it. For example, what I've known in the market of Penang, there are services that runs land transport up to China from Penang or from KL, which use land trucking that goes through the Indo-China, probably to Bangkok and also to Vietnam. Of course, this is a alternative solution. We can't expect the price would be cheaper, higher than the sea freight, but definitely cheaper than the air freight. Yeah, it all subjected to the expectation of the transit time as well. Okay, so last but not least, the risk of this supply chain that is because of pandemic is we have seen the ripple effect across all supply chain overseas. To take one sector, let's take automotive sector. We have seen there is a shortages of raw materials for the automotive sectors. All the big automotive sectors are basically impacted, including those automotive sectors which is into electric vehicles, where the parts, for example, the semiconductors that is required to be built into a car, there are also shortages. So in terms of sales order, planning, forecast, it's getting a hit right now in this industry, especially what we have seen those producers in China, which they are very much dependent on. not only on automotive, pharmaceuticals. In an American pharmaceutical setup, they have slow turnovers of 1 to 3 months of inventories because of lack of raw materials to produce as how they used to produce before. And one thing about this ripple effect, apart from operational challenges and industrial, challenges, we also have seen quite notable companies, and this one is an American medical device company that has declared Chapter 11 of bankruptcy, citing the coronavirus. So, at one end, we are putting very much hope that we would be able to pass through these uncharted waters seamlessly through the availability of vaccine. But on the other hand, we also have seen the brutal effect of this COVID-19 towards the supply chain and the sustainability of the business units or business owners. So I believe, coming to summarize the list that has been articulated, right, through DHL Group's surveys and findings of these top 10 supply chain risks, as part of advice to my organization as well to the rest, this is the time that we have to have an agile, flexible execution edge, because as what you have seen, the weakness of a bullwhip effects and those uncertainties would require us to move our position very fast and rapidly, and at the same time to play precautionary measures in this difficult, challenging time. So I therefore end the presentation of the top 10 supply chain risks as brief just now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riwan.